Hello everyone, here is the answers to questions 2 and 3 in Unit 12 of AC201. And in question 2, we have that on October 1st, McCaffrey Signage is going to enter into a contract to provide a neon storefront sign for Star Sighting Dance Center. McCaffrey is going to charge them $5,000 for the sign once it is completed, and they are going to require a 25% down payment from Star Sighting at the time they enter into this contract. Well, the sign is going to be completed and installed on November 10th, a little more than a month after they signed the contract originally, at which point McCaffrey is going to bill Star Sighting Dance Center. In total, their cost to create and install the sign is going to be $2,100. And then on November 15th, finally, after they've billed them, Star Sighting is going to remit payment to McCaffrey Signage. So we need to record journal entries for this process of recognizing revenue at one singular point in time when there is a down payment. And the first thing we need to record is that down payment itself. So on October 1st, Star Sighting is going to sign this contract with McCaffrey. Well, what of substance is happening here? At this point, McCaffrey hasn't done anything to create the signage. So they can't record any revenues because they haven't made any product for them. At this point also, Star Sighting is not going to be liable for anything to McCaffrey. If McCaffrey decides they don't want to do this anymore and they pull out of the contract, it's not like they can bill Star Sighting for the remainder of this $5,000 because they haven't done any of the contracted work that they're entering into. The only thing of substance that's happening at this time on October 1st is that McCaffrey is receiving a 25% down payment from Star Sighting, which means McCaffrey actually owes Star Sighting something. They owe them the construction of that sign, or they owe them their down payment back. So we're going to put the actual cash on the books in this instance for the amount that McCaffrey is receiving at the time. And then we have to set up an account that denotes that McCaffrey is liable to provide something to their customer. And in this case, we're going to record that as unearned revenue. And to record that amount, you're going to take the contract amount and you're going to multiply it by the down payment percentage. So in this case, the contract is for $5,000. But Star Sighting is only transferring 25% of that as a down payment. And 25% of $5,000 means that at the time of this contract signing, McCaffrey is getting $1,250, and now they're obligated to finish this contract out to create the sign or to repay that $1,250 to Star Sighting. So here we entered a contract and received down payments. On November 10th, McCaffrey has finished the sign and they're installing it, which means they've met all of the obligations of the contract on their end. They've completed everything that they said they were going to. They put the sign into place, like they're done with everything that they need to do for Star Sighting. So what are we going to put on the books here? Well, this is the point of revenue being recognized. And when we recognize revenues, it's going to require two different entries. One to recognize that sales revenue, and one to recognize McCaffrey's expense for the cost they paid to construct the sign. So on November 10th, put in the right date. There we go. The first thing we got to account for is the fact that McCaffrey is no longer obligated to Star Sighting. They don't owe them anything because they've done all of the performance obligations of the contract. So we need to take that unearned revenue off the books. We're also given our information right here saying that the sign was completed, installed, and we billed them. So at this point, who owes who is changing perspectives here. Now Star Sighting owes McCaffrey the remaining balance of this contract because McCaffrey has met all of their performance obligations, which means we are going to put that accounts receivable on to our books for the remaining balance. And we're going to record the whole thing now because we've actually performed our obligation and completed this transaction is sales revenue. So how much is going to go into each account? Well, unearned revenue went on the books for $12.50. It's got to come off the books for $12.50. Accounts receivable, in this case, is the remainder of the contract price that is now owed to McCaffrey that they're eligible to receive. It's $5,000 in total. McCaffrey's already received $1,250 of it. So the remaining balance, which is owed to them, is the remainder, $3,750. But they get to recognize the full $5,000 of revenue at this time. So journal entry, in this case, removes the liability from the books, puts the receivable on the books, and records sales revenue for the full balance of the contract. And in this case, we satisfied the Star Sighting contract. So that records the revenue. Let's record the expense on the same date. So on November 10th, what's the entry to always record the expense? Whenever you sell something, it is a debit to COGS, to cost of goods sold, over a credit to the inventory account that you are reducing. In this case, we finished that thing, so it's going to come out of finished goods inventory. And we record this not for the contract amount, not for the $5,000, but for the actual cost that McCaffrey incurred to meet their performance obligations to create and install the sign, which given in the problem is $2,100. So we're going to debit COGS for $2,100. We're going to credit finished goods inventory for that same $2,100 when we recorded COGS on this sale. And then lastly, on November 15th, that amount owed, the remaining contract amount, is going to be transferred from Star Sighting to McCaffrey Signage when Star Sighting, pays off their debt and finishes up the whole terms of this contract. So how much was owed to McCaffrey? Well, they put on their books earlier that they were eligible to receive $3,750. Let's assume that is the amount of cash that Star Sighting is transferring to McCaffrey Signage, $3,750. And since they paid their obligation to us, that receivable should no longer be on the books. We're going to remove that receivable for the same $3,750 when we receive payment from Star Sighting. The next question is the recognition of revenue not at one singular point in time, but over a period of time, a period of installment payments, if you will. So on April 1st, Pet Paris Incorporated is going to sign a contract with Halsey Police Department to provide monthly grooming services for the K9 unit each month for the next 6 months. At the time of this signing, Halsey is going to pay Pet Paris $4,500. So they're paying, or Pet Paris, they're paying us in advance, in full, for the entire amount of the contract. Well, can we recognize all that revenue? We cannot, because we've not performed all the obligations of our contract, which in this case is to provide grooming services each month for the next 6 months. So we have 6 separate performance obligations, and we can't recognize even a portion of that revenue until we've met our duties as one of those obligations. So on April 1st, when Pet Paris and Halsey entered in this contract, and Halsey Police Department transfers the full contract price in advance to Pet Paris is receiving the cash, and they would put the cash on the books. They're receiving the full payment in advance, which is $4,500, but they can't record it as service revenue because they've not done the actual service yet, which means they have to put it on the books as a liability. I'm going to call it unearned revenue. If you're a company that has different ways that you earn revenue, so different services, sales, etc., you might want to call it unearned service revenue. I'd be fine with that too. That liability is going to go on the books for the full $4,500 when we entered into the Halsey contract and received advanced payment. And then this contract has different obligations identified, again, to provide a monthly service every month for the next 6 months. So whenever we meet one of those obligations, we get to systematically recognize a little bit of that revenue. Some of it was going to become earned instead of unearned. And the first time that's going to happen is at the end of April, when we get to recognize that we actually provided some of these services to Halsey Police Department. Well, in that case, we're not liable to have to provide them with as much service in the future. So we get to decrease our unearned revenue account. And because we did actually provide the service, we get to recognize it as earned revenue under our service revenue account. But for how much? Well, makes sense to me here that since we're doing monthly performance for this company, and it seems like we're doing for this police department, and we're doing about the same amount of work every period, we should recognize this in a straight line method, which means we would take the original contract amount and divide it by the number of obligations that we have to meet, the number of periods that are in this contract. So we got $4,500 in advance to provide a service every month for the next 6 months. We'd recognize 1/6 of that every time we performed our dog grooming services, which is $750. So each and every month for the next 6 months, Pet Paris is going to record the same exact entry over and over again: a debit to unearned revenue for $750 and a credit to service revenue for $750. When they record the journal entry to denote the fact that they met the performance obligation on the Halsey contract.